Από την πρώτη μέρα του φεστιβάλ ξεκινήσαμε να παρουσιάσουμε όλο το εύρος των εξειδικεύσεων και των εφαρμογών του συστήματος, σαφέστατα σε διάφορους τομείς, όπως η προσωπική αποτελεσματικότητα, η επαγγελματική διάκριση, η σωματική και η ψυχική υγεία, η οικογένεια φυσικά και η εκπαίδευση. Θα γυρίσω στα αγγλικά. Αγαπητέ Δημήτρη, που είστε backstage, δεν ξέρω τώρα αν μπορείτε να ανοίξετε τον ήχο για να μ' ακούει και ο Lucas. Okay, I'm turning to English now. Though I sent a mere translation of this first Greek paragraph to our international guest, Lucas Derks, so that he follows, out of courtesy, I will turn to English. So I was saying that the core theme is NLP. So for more than 20 years, our main consideration in the nlpgreece is the epistemology of NLP and how it is combined with various scientific fields. One core value also of our team is to always get trained to new approaches so that we enrich our own minds, and at the same time, we enrich the platform with new generation tools for the people that have been trusting us since 1998. Within this frame, we have incorporated Lucas Derks' approach. We got trained into this approach, the social panorama, and then mentioned as mental space psychology, along with mεριά and nlpgreece, part of the nlpgreece team. And today it is an honor that Lucas Derks himself has accepted the invitation to join the nlpgreece team of international guests for this great festival, the Leading Minds Festival. Lucas Derks, with studies in psychology, met NLP and combined it so that to produce this deep approach, the social panorama and mental space psychology. Lucas, I don't know if you can hear me. Thank you for being here with us today. And we are all ears for uncovering the spatial structure of family ties, a mental space psychology approach of family relations. We are all ears.
Thank you, Alexandra. Well, to me, it's quite a challenge to try to do all of that in 40 minutes. And I will start with a brief overview of my history. You told already something about it. When you see this first slide, you see me at the left-hand side in 1977. Then I went off to Africa, but it was also the year that I encountered NLP for the first time in the frame of my psychology studies. So to me, NLP has always been part of psychology. And then at the right-hand side, you see me as an NLP trainer in 1995, where I was teaching practitioners. Then on the left underside, you see three people, me in the middle, and that's in the beginning of 2000, maybe 2004 or so, that we decided, the three of us, Walter Utsch and Wolfgang Walker, to start something because we discovered the importance of mental space. And so we started what we called the International Laboratory for Mental Space Research. Now, that became a very good group of friends. And then we were clear that it could not spread when we would just stay the three of us. And so then later, and that's at the bottom of the page, you see me at the right-hand side of these three men, and that's Robert Hemelaar and René Koppelaar. It's all in the Netherlands. And we started the Society for Mental Space Psychology with the aim of changing the worldwide paradigm in psychology in the direction of space. Now, we knew that this was, of course, a scientific goal, so maybe a sort of grandiose goal, But well, most people who do NLP know that when you not start with something big, you probably end with something very small. And so we started with something big, and we are doing all right in achieving this. And I see this lecture as part of this road to achieve this vision. Now, it may take another 50 years or so. Then on this image on the right-hand side, you see that's in 2019, and there's two books. One book that I'm holding is Mental Space Psychology, and then at the right side of that is Mental Spatial Diagnosis. And the things that I'm going to tell today, that I hope to end with, have to do with how you can get from, you could say, where academic psychology is to something like this. Like, for instance, when it's about clinical psychology, how you can start to diagnose spatially instead of based on symptoms, and how, as a psychologist, you look at all psychological phenomena as something that happens in the space in and around the person. Now, the reason to do this, so you could wonder, yeah, and then so what? Well, the reason is that for doing psychotherapy and doing neurolinguistic programming, what we miss out is a theory that is fundamental enough to bridge the gap between, you could say, academic experimental psychology and our practical clinical work. And this has been a problem for a long time. And what my hopes is that mental space psychology can bridge this gap, so that a lot of clinical work that uses space maybe for a long time already, and there's a lot of examples of that. And then the more specific space-oriented psychotherapies like constellation work or timeline therapy or the social panorama that I will speak about, that these are all founded in something solid. Now, so that starts off with very basic psychology. And the first thing is, suppose that you're looking into your garden, and it depends, of course, where you live in the world, but and you see something like this, and then you immediately know what it is. And what you know is, it's a squirrel. But when you look back at what you saw, oh, uh, wait a minute, talk. What you saw is only the squirrel's tail. So that means that from this squirrel's tail, your mind is capable of making a whole squirrel. Now, this was something that was already clear to Gestalt psychologists who said, yeah, the part is the whole. And you could see that, like, when you walk into a street and you see, when you are a car lover, the backlight of some car, and then you see only a part of that car, and then you know, a Mercedes, or you know, that's a Fiat or whatever. So that you, from just seeing this part, know the whole, and your mind brings that whole to your observation, to your perception. Now, the other thing is that when you see the squirrel, when you only saw the tail, you still see the squirrel at the place in mental space where the tail was. Now, this is something that became very important for mental space psychology, but it was overlooked also by me for decades, or maybe for hundreds of years. And then when I have seen the whole squirrel projected by my brain based on my memory, on that spot where I saw only the tail, then I still can do a lot with that, because I can imagine on the base of that where the squirrel maybe may go and where it may pop up, that I can see it again. And it can be that all these places where I imagine the squirrel to go are not really visible for me, so that it's just something that happens in my imagination, and that you could say, calculate the path of the squirrel on the base of my capacity of orientation and calculation in my brain, and then come up with a possible location, and then I can look over there and maybe, yes, it pops up there. It was exactly as I predicted with my brain. And this is a very fundamental psychology, you could say. But the thing is that in the beginning of psychology, people try to find the parts of psychological processes. And then they started to see the difference between perception and memory and imagination. And these different things made it hard to see that they're in fact one process. Of course, they're parts of one process, but they go so quickly after each other. So when you have this experience of not seeing the squirrel tail, you may go in maybe 8 milliseconds or 20 milliseconds, you come to knowing that's a squirrel, and before you know, you are already considering where the squirrel may be going to. So when you see this one process, then you're doing a better job to understand what's going on in the mind. And then the other thing is that you see that, yeah, in fact, you project the squirrel, even when you cannot see it anymore, on the place where you have seen it. Now, this is something that everybody can test out for themselves. So you now look around to find an object, see it for a second and close your eyes, and then you still know where it is. So the location of that object is still there in your mind. And probably most learning starts with something like this. So the concept of the model of the world that we use in NLP is maybe based on that we have perceptions when we are very small, maybe in the cradle, and then we see something, and then our mind starts to notice where it is and knows that it is out there. Now, one of the things that's important also for mental space psychology is the recognition that our experience is out there in space and not so much in our brain. So you would expect that, but yeah, you don't experience nothing. Maybe some piece of music when you have especially stereophonic recordings, when you have a headphone on, that you think, oh, I sense it in the middle of my head. But that's maybe an illusion, because it could be that you don't sense it in the middle of your brain at all. Now let's move on. So the metaphor that fits to this would be that the psyche, the mind, is a camera that makes observations, and then also a projector that projects these observations directly back, and that there is memory in between, because when you see something that you have no memories on, you cannot complete that image. So when it's a new animal, so where you have never seen any part of, and you have no idea of what it is, then maybe your memory comes up with some hypothesis. Yeah, it could be a snake, or it could be a fish, or a kangaroo, but you don't know. So you are uncertain, and then it may be difficult to know where it is and to know anything about an object. Now, the thing is that when you use this metaphor, you still get the idea that there's light coming over your eyes to your brain, and that there's something going back to the place where you have observed the object, but that's probably not the case. And so your brain probably is just doing this all the time, and it simulates the spatial experience, where it starts with maybe a concrete spatial perception, but then it simulates that also now after some milliseconds, because when you did close your eyes, you know that you can close your eyes very fast after you have seen something, and then it's still there, and your mind can work on what you just have a snapshot seen of, the snapshot that you just have seen of. So it's a metaphor, the camera memory projector, that's helpful, but it's not the definitive metaphor for understanding everything with the mind. Now, what we need to recognize at the moment is that the most important or most influential paradigm in psychology is neuroscience. And then especially in neuroscience, people try to find out where in the brain activity is located when a certain observation or a certain mental task is executed in the mind. And it seems that the assumption is that when we know where in the brain something takes place, we know a lot. And this is where I have a lot of doubt. And I'm not the only one. Because when you look at the results of neuroscience, then have been done scanning research with all kinds of issues and all kinds of topics. And of course, there's knowledge coming from that, but it's never fulfills its promise. And many articles about neuroscience end with, now we know where this is located in the brain, so now we have a start of maybe inventing some type of therapy. Now, and the therapeutic methods that people come up with are, for instance, magnetic influencing the brain, or even with electrodes into the brain and then cooking the location up where some activity is, undesired activity was discovered. And so it's, there's a lot to say about that, but for us at the moment, it's important to see that the focus on the brain is very strong, and this makes mental space psychology a little bit difficult to accept by mainstream, you could say. So the focus is on the brain as an organ, with the hopes that by studying it, we will understand the mind or the psyche or what's happening in people. And probably not something that will work. So I call mental space psychology a new paradigm in psychology. Now, a paradigm is a new standard, a way of seeing things, a way of looking at the psyche. So implicitly, all psychologists do have a paradigm, and so they do believe something about how the brain works, and that can vary from seeing it as an electronic switchboard or a computer or a chemical reaction system or something like that. But when you work with NLP, you see that the brain has some properties like a computer, but it's not the same. So, for instance, a computer executes always as fast as the first time when you have a good computer. So when you have a lousy computer, it slows down, and when you have programmed something, then the first time it goes quick, and then after several years, it goes pretty slow because of the slack and all the things of disturbing things that enter the computer's memory. With the brain, it's the opposite. The brain goes faster and faster with a rehearsal of the task. So when there's something programmed in the brain, so the first time you need to do it with full attention, and it may go slow and it may be difficult. And then when you try it over and over again, as any musician and every person who does regular exercise of things knows, things go faster and faster. And after a while, you don't need your attention anymore. It runs by itself fully automatically. Now, so that's a paradigm that we work with in NLP, and it mismatches computer. So that's important to see. Now, what the briefest formulation is of the mental spatial paradigm is that space is the primary organizing principle in the mind. And it means that everything that's going on in the person, everything that is thought or felt or experienced or concluded or rationalized or a person is afraid of or whatever, is going on in the space around the person. And that is what we study. So we have a larger space around the brain than to psychology than the space only inside of the skull. And so that's important thing to look at. Now, we were not the only one. Mental space psychology was not the only psychologist who looked at space and orientation. And it started in the 70s when John O'Keefe and Lynn Nadel found out that there in the hippocampus are cells that respond to where a mouse is in a maze, in a labyrinth, you could say. So a mouse that moves in an experiment has cells that responds whether he's coming close to a corner or when he's coming to something that's in front or when he has passed something. And these cells, called grid cells and also play cells, seem to be the most primitive foundation of the brain when it comes to orientation. And it's, I think, very useful to conclude that every creature that moves around in the world needs to be able to orient itself, to find food and partners and safety. And for that, it needs to have a navigational system. Now, navigational system, everybody knows from your car. And you could think of that there's a part in the brain that is the heart core, so where fundamental navigation takes place. But then on top of that, and this is what most people who do research in this area today believe, on top of that are highly sophisticated parts in the cortex that also take part in orientation. And what they do is based on what happens in the hippocampus, but it's so maybe without the hippocampus you cannot think that way, you cannot orient yourself in the real world, in the imaginative world, in your world of abstraction. It will probably not be possible because you miss your core chip, you could say, for orientation. But the rest of the brain takes part as well. And here you have the idea that that orientation is in fact the basis of all thinking. And that is what is called these days spatial cognition. And spatial cognition stems from, for instance, the work from Barbara Tversky, a professor of Harvard, who discovered all kinds of spatial aspects of thinking. So her conclusion is that thinking is movement in space, where we can think of that we move concepts in the mental space around us, or that we move our body in space. Without movement, there happens nothing in the mind, you could say. Then the mind may have a representation of the world, but it stands still. There's nothing changing there. And from NLP, you know that change is often what we see, what we seek, and what we want, and then movement of things, moving the client through their inner landscape, or moving concepts in the inner landscape of the client, are the things that we make happen. Then there's another part in psychology that took interest in you could say the relation between things out there and what happens in the brain, and that's the work of Milner and Goodale, and they conceived the hypothesis that there are, in a way, two streams in the brain, one that takes care of what it is, what you see, and the other is where it is located, what you see. Now, this is an interesting hypothesis, but I don't think that this will have a long life, because there's too many things that speak against that. Then there's neurons that respond to invasions in the near space around us, and they are called peripersonal neurons, and the research there is very well described by Michael Graziano. And you must know that then when something comes very close, very quickly, so when I come towards you or so, then these cells go in a sort of state of alarm. They call, something wrong. But yeah, so they don't need to cause any action, but they respond to the space just around your body. Interesting part. And then there's another thing that is eye tracking. Here you see on the left hand side of the screen there's a computer, and on the bottom there's a person. This person, his eyes are tracked, so over you could say goggles or lenses, the location where he's looking, the spot where he's paying attention to, can be recorded, and then this person is asked to memorize these images. So now the person is looking at these images, so this red shirt and the banana and the high heel and the key, and then the screen is switched off and the person is asked to remember, to retrieve these memories, and at the same time also the eyes are tracked. And what was found is that there's a strong tendency for the eyes to go over the same spots on the now black screen where the images were before. And this is also something that when you think of what I was talking about in the beginning about the squirrel, has to do with this, because the eyes seem to look out in space and see the images projected there, and it is shown by how the eyes follow them. So the eyes do the same thing largely as when they are looking, when they are just remembering. This is very interesting too. Now, after having looked at this research, we come to something that's important for coming to clinical work. Now, clinical psychologists are normally occupied with proving that their therapies work or that therapies work. So a lot of clinical experimentations are testing interventions, and often in randomized, double-blind, controlled, placebo group designs to try to prove that a certain type of therapy works best or better or not. And for NLP, it's always been a challenge. So NLP is a big toolbox with a lot of methods, and it's not possible to really check the effectiveness of all these methods. EMDR has one tool, and people say, yeah, it stems also from NLP. Is a simple tool that you can easily check, and you can also do all kinds of experiments where you can do the math, the statistics afterwards, and by that it's easy to prove that it's effective and even more effective than other methods. But NLP as such is just too many things to create a design. Although some people have tried it, it's not so easy to check that out and prove that it works in that way. But there's another thing to clinical experimentation, and that goes back to Pierre Janet, for instance, in the 1900s. Pierre Janet, he was a psychiatrist, and he experimented with clients and hypnosis. And on the basis of what he found there, he came to many conclusions about how the brain was working. Things like dissociation and repression, you could say, stem from his work. And now, when we come to mental space psychology, you could say that on the base of working with NLP and timeline therapy in NLP and search panorama in NLP and other methods that use space and help to the client to remove or move subjects or concepts in their mental space. This has shown over and over again the importance of space. So I think that the search panorama to me was, of course, the most convincing part. I worked with that for now I think 26 years, and that proves that space is highly important in getting things to change. Now, so after all, we come to mental space psychology, where the question, where is something located, is the most crucial point. And then this goes immediately to the applications thereof, and so I will go to that. And one of the applications that I already mentioned is the social panorama. Now, the social panorama, I think, is brought mental space psychology to the foreground, although timeline therapy already did a lot. But the conclusion from timeline therapy that space is the primary organizing principle was not made yet. But when you work with social panorama, you can come to that conclusion. Now, what's the social panorama? That's the idea that people walk around with a landscape filled with the images of the people they know. And they have placed these images on fixed locations around them. And on the basis of that, they know who's who in their world. Also, they know what the relationship to that person is by having this person far away, close by, in the middle, in the center, high up. So what you see here at the bottom is a person, and this person looks around in his social panorama, and there are all these images, and also there the eyes in the middle show that there's a level, that's the own eye level of the person, and then the eyes of the people that they are aware of, the personification, we call it, in their social panorama can be higher up or lower down or at the same level. And that all seems to be extremely meaningful for the type of relationship the person experiences. Now, so by having discovered this, it became a logical step to try to use that. And the use is, of course, when you are not satisfied with a certain relationship, you can look where is this personification, this person located in my social panorama, and then see what would be a better place and move the person to a better spot. Now, this has many possibilities. Oh. Met Lucas. Jan, ik ben in een online ding. Ik ga je terugbellen. Oké. Oké, ciao. Yeah, excuse me. I had to have the phone on for if there's anything that I need to know from the organization. So the social panorama makes a lot of interventions possible when it comes to relationships with humans. One of the things that is also possible is the relationship with yourself. And in the social panorama, we found out that the self is also spatially represented in the shape of feelings in the body connected to images outside of the body. And we could say the feeling of self is connected. You see this yellow line going to this yellowish alien type of image. And that alien type of image is the self-image. Now, we found out that variety in shapes and sizes and locations of the self-images in differing situations are deciding over the self-confidence of a person. So when a client complains of lacking self-confidence, we only have to look at where the self-image is located in that context and then see, yes, it's small or far away, or it's double, or it's complicated in another way. So that's then a reason to do something about it. It looks like this. So you see here a person in the context, the pink lady has a feeling of self in her belly, connected by this line to this more white image of herself on the left. It's great possibilities to work with. Now, another thing that we found out is that when we have an issue, any problem, that this issue has a tendency to show up in the center of our attention. Now, you're probably not surprised about it, but it is something that when you look at mental space becomes very important, because you can understand that when somebody is having some problem, this problem stands out in the middle of his field of awareness and is blocking all other things. So it forces the person to be occupied with this thing that is straight in front. Now, and of course, people may try to get rid of it when they cannot resolve this issue. So they may try to get it to the side, try to repress it, try to move it to a distance. And you could say that coping uh, can mean that the person is not resolving the issue in the sense that they have the resources to deal with it and know how to go about things, but that they can partly do that by um, getting the thing out of the center of attention so that they free their center of attention for other things. Now, then another area for mental space psychology is where it's about metaphors of space. And this is a metaphor where this person is in a sort of circular cylinder, enclosed, closed off from the outer world. And people, clients in therapy may explain that spontaneously when they maybe are depressed or fully occupied with something. Or they may, when we ask them, now, and how does this look like? So, what does this resemble your situation? That they come with spatial metaphors. And what we found out, and what, for instance, Andrew Austin found out, and other therapists, also Vasily Zafiris, who's also in this program, and that when you work with these metaphors in a more literal way, often people can find a way out of this metaphor. And then when they find out a way of the metaphor, they often have also come to literal conclusions of how to go about their problem. So they solve the problem by solving it metaphorically. A very interesting and important area. Here another example of a person that's in front of a wall and it feels very heavy on the stomach. Now, for instance, you can ask a person, now go around the wall, and what do you see from there, and what's coming up when you go to the other side? So that could be an idea. Now, then something that's also, I think, a very interesting area of mental space psychology is that the research that has been going on from the 60s and 70s in the differences in cognitive styles between the left and the right hemisphere, that this also may have a spatial component. And the spatial component is represented here as the hypothesis of the hemispheric projection fields. And what you see is that here the left hemisphere is the smaller area in the center, so straight in front of this person, also including part of the head and of the throat, but mainly close by, and that the right hemisphere is projecting around that a bigger area. Now, the left hemisphere has this more detailed, systematic calculation type of processing of information, you could say, and the right hemisphere is more intuitive, more general, more background. Orientation and relational things are in the right hemisphere, and the left hemisphere is dealing with language and cognition and all the things where we are trying to be precise and we have to think really hard and reorganize things and systems are more in the left side. Now, so this idea has also interesting consequences when you connect it to, for instance, differences in personality. So here you see the same thing again, and here you see the person that's standing. She looks a little bit like it's a lady that's a little bit tigery due to pixels. She has also her head in the smaller area where in the middle you see these more academic skills and symbols and cognitive systems. And then around that are these general concepts and also social, emotional, and spatial orientation. And so this is the same thing, but then more pictorial. Now, then the hypothesis is that there are people who have another orientation here. Some may have two left hemispheres, you could say, due to that they have one neurotransmitter that is dominant in both hemispheres, and they may have a very big area with these cognitive skills that belong to the left hemisphere. And then there's people who have two right hemispheres, you could say. Now, but for instance, I found that some people who have these two left hemispheres, who can be diagnosed as Asperger autist, may have difficulty with the social panorama, because when they try to see the images of people close by, these stand in the way because they stand in their left hemispheric calculation side, and they cannot think around it, because in other people these are in the background of their right hemispheric background knowledge. So now there are other things, like for instance the images of people inside people, so that often have to do with personality disorders and things like possession. Yeah, you could think of borderline, when the borders between me and others are not well drawn. And then as the last example is depression. In mental space we found that depression, when the client does not know why they are depressed, often go together with clouds of darkness, as shown here. And behind these clouds of darkness are the repressed issues. And so here we get to the end of my presentation, and I think there are still maybe some minutes for questions. So I don't know how to end this presentation. Maybe somebody can do that for me, so I can see the audience. Yes, it seems to be possible.
All right, super, perfect. Back again with Lucas. Lucas, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, super. Okay. So I don't know. Are there any questions that for Lucas?
There are not any questions at the moment. No questions
Not
at the
any
moment.
questions. Okay. So all I have to do, dear Lucas, is a big thank you for being here with us today. As you mentioned from the beginning, um, 45 minutes is not enough to capture the width and the breadth and the depth of social panorama and mental space psychology. Isn't that so? So that's why nlpgreece provided for that, because you very well know last year we started with a series of conferences dedicated to a specific context. We started last year with the NLP for health, and this year, 2022, we are carrying on with a new conference dedicated in education and family, the NLP in education and family. And we provided that Lucas will be here with us on May 29th for a half a day workshop, so that we have more of his wisdom and the wonderful work. Lucas, thank you so much, and I'm looking forward for the May 29th, if I remember well, for our NLP in Education conference, where you will be part of it.
Yeah, so we can focus on some practical applications then, so that people who want to apply these ideas, that they have more handholds to do that.
Super. Thank you. Thank you. Big thank you, Lucas. Big thank you, Lucas.
Thank you, Alexandra, for making it happen, and the organization.
Thank you.
And
thank you
I
for
hope
leaving
that
mine.
everybody that watched this likes it, and I hope that the fact that there were no questions means that it was very clear.
Yes. or very deep.
Yeah, we don't know.
Okay, thank you again.